I'm sure you've heard the term sinking funds before, and if you haven't, you'll definitely learn today. Sinking funds are individual saving strategies for specific goals. Whether you're saving for that goal in a bank account, in an investment account, or a cash envelope, you're contributing to that goal's sinking fund. Sinking funds can be a great way to save for goals, save for expenses that tend to pop up on you unexpectedly, or save for things, big or small, that you want to have money for in the future. In this episode, I'm helping you get clear on leveraging sinking funds, which sinking funds you should have, and how to budget for them. Get ready to feel like a sinking fund pro. According to a CNBC study, Americans save less than 5% of their disposable income. That's the income that's left over after all of their bills and responsibilities are covered. Saving less than 5% likely means your savings could be feeling a little dry. What about expenses you know are coming? Things like birthdays, Christmas, the inevitable car breakdown. That's where sinking funds can come in handy. A sinking fund is a way to save money for something specific by setting aside money towards that fund every month. So, for example, you could have a travel sinking fund. You would contribute a specific amount of money, usually not much, towards that fund every month. So assuming that you have a trip planned in the next 6 months, every month you would want to put a certain amount of money aside in preparation for that trip. That is your travel sinking fund. Now, there are no limits on the number of sinking funds a person can have. It really just depends on what you have available in your budget to save towards each sinking fund. I actually have clients who have 2 to 3 sinking funds, and then I have some other clients who have 10 to 15 sinking funds. So there is no one size fits all. There is no exact number that a person needs to have. It's just as long as you can manage and maintain your sinking funds, feel free to have as many as you want. So some examples of sinking funds we'll talk about a little bit later in this episode, but I will say a popular one among my clients is saving for their quarterly, semi-annual, or annual expenses. So, for example, I have a lot of clients who pay their car insurance premium every 6 months. So they have a sinking fund set up just for paying their car insurance premium. So every month they're adding their monthly amount. So come the 6-month mark, they have the full amount ready to pay for the auto insurance. So as I mentioned earlier, sinking funds can be set up in cash, in a savings account, or in an investment account. If you choose to save for your sinking funds with cash, you would technically, if you want to really figure out how to do this the right way, you would use the envelope system. So you would assign a single envelope to each fund. So one fund per envelope. Then you would label the envelopes accordingly. So whatever the fund is that you're saving for, write the name of that sinking fund on the envelope so you know exactly what you're saving towards. And then put your cash savings in that envelope every single month. Now, if you choose to save for your sinking funds in a savings account, you would set up a specific account just for that sinking fund. So just like you would have one sinking fund per envelope, you would have one sinking fund per savings account. I've talked about this on the podcast before. I think one account per goal just makes your life easier, makes things more organized, and you quickly can assess how far or close you are to reaching that goal. So I would suggest, again, naming the account after the fund. So a lot of times you can log into your bank account online portal, couldn't think of the word, and change the account name. So whenever you create a new savings account, you would want to rename it to match whatever you're saving for. So whatever the sinking fund is. Then you would have your monthly allotment transferred into that account every month until you need the funds. Now, I know I say, monthly, but let's say you are paid bi-weekly and you want to have bi-weekly transfers. That's totally fine. Just keep in mind that the monthly amount, so let's say the monthly amount is 50 that you want to have contributed to that sinking fund, every paycheck you would put 25 so that you could have 50 for the month. So as I mentioned, you want to have one savings account per sinking fund or per goal. I want to spend a little bit more time here just so this is very clear. If you have 5 sinking fund goals, you would have 5 savings accounts, so one per goal. The more goals you have, the more savings accounts you're going to have. So I highly recommend you set those accounts up with a bank that doesn't have monthly fees or minimum balance requirements. High yield savings accounts are a great option. Ally, which is an online bank that offers high yield savings accounts, also has a feature where you can bucket out your sinking funds. So all of your money can go into your Ally savings account. And from there, you can bucket that total amount in the account into different segments. That way you can easily see how much is allocated to each bucket without technically having multiple savings accounts. So if you're the type of person who, I really don't want to have all these accounts and deal with all this, go for Ally, where you can actually have that singular savings account, but you can bucket the money in there so that you know exactly how much is allocated to each sinking fund. That is the entire purpose of my recommendation of one account per goal, right? So you can clearly, quickly, easily see where you're at in relation to that goal. So if we were to dissect this even further, the reason why you wouldn't want multiple goals saved in one account, unless you can bucket it out, is purely organizational. If you have $3,000 saved in a single account, but you have 5 different goals allocated with that $3,000, how do you know how much has actually been saved for each goal, right? Like, what if you are not contributing equal amounts? What if one of your goals is due next month and the next one is due next year? How do you quickly assess, okay, I'm on track for my goals or I'm not? So muddying a big amount of money across multiple goals in one account really makes for poor organization. Now, if you choose to save for your sinking funds in an investment account, you would have your monthly allotment transferred into that account every month until you need the funds. But there are a few things that I would want you to keep in mind first. First, investing only works in your favor when you are in it for the long haul, okay? So the only sinking funds or goals that you should be investing for should be a minimum of a few years out. Anything a year or less really should just be saved for in cash or in a savings account. Now, for me, I have a long-term goal of owning a second home in Palm Springs, and I've had this goal for a few years now. So when I first set up this goal or decided this is something that I truly want, I decided to save for it in an investment account that I transfer a specific amount of money to each month. The money that is transferred into that investment account is invested, and ideally, when I'm ready to actually make the move and purchase the home, I should have some significant returns. So another thing to keep in mind with investing is that the returns aren't guaranteed. So like I said, ideally, when I'm ready to get this second home in Palm Springs, I would hope to have significant returns, but I don't know the future. You don't know the future. We don't know. The U.S. economy could completely crash. I'm not expecting that to happen, but my point is that nothing is guaranteed. Okay, so returns aren't guaranteed. Timing is everything. But historically, the longer that your money is invested, the more you will earn over that time. So that's why I say if you are going to save for these sinking funds in an investment account, make sure they're a few years out so you can really get the most return. And lastly, when you are ready to move forward with your sinking fund purchase and you go to sell your investments to get the cash out, keep in mind that any gains will be taxed and reported on that year's tax return. Okay, so nobody escapes this. I feel like this is not something that's talked about much when people talk about investing, but your gains, so any returns that you have on the money you invested, is taxed. So just keep that in mind. Okay, now that we've covered what sinking funds are and the different ways you can save for them, let's talk about some sinking funds you should actually have and how to budget for them. So when helping my clients set up sinking funds for their specific situation, I like to start by asking what expenses come up for them that can be saved for in advance. And some of the common answers are gifts for birthdays or events, so baby showers, weddings, bachelorette parties, christenings, etc. Christmas, obviously. Car maintenance is a big one. And I mentioned this earlier, but annual or non-monthly expenses. So annual subscriptions like Amazon Prime or quarterly bills, semi-annual insurance payments, and home repairs. So once we get clear on the things that typically come up for my clients and we say, okay, how can we save for these things in advance? Then I like to move on to things that my clients would love to start saving for on a regular basis to indulge in when the time comes. And some of those common answers are travel, clothes and shopping, or home renovations. So if you are new to sinking funds or savings goals in general, I suggest starting with one or two just to get your feet wet, right? Once you can get into a rhythm with like contributing to those one or two accounts and you have a nice savings method in place, then you can obviously take on more. But once you know which sinking funds you actually do want to get started with and set up, it's time to think about what you'll need to actually save for them. And I think we should break this up into two different categories. The first category is sinking funds with specific amounts or timelines, and the second category is sinking funds with no specific amount or timeline. So let's take the first category, sinking funds with specific amounts or timelines. First, I want you to take the total amount needed for that sinking fund. Okay, so let's say you have a sinking fund for having a down payment on a car and you want to have $5,000 as your down payment. So that's the total amount needed. Then you take the total time before you actually need that amount. So get clear on when do you want to have this $5,000? When do you want to get this new car? So let's assume you want to get the new car in 5 months. Then you divide the total amount by the number of months. So 5,000 divided by 5. 5,000 is the total amount we need, and we want to get this car in 5 months. That comes out to $1,000 a month. Save that amount each month until you need it. That's exactly how you work sinking funds that have specific amounts or timelines. But this is where your budget comes in handy. Saving $1,000 a month is not easy to do, right? Depending on your situation. So take a look at your budget. Review it to see if you can even afford to save what is needed to reach that sinking fund amount by the due date, okay? If it's not reasonable, you got to adjust some things. Maybe you only save $3,000, or maybe you push it out to 10 months, right? So when you know exactly how much you need to save to reach your goal, you can use your budget to reverse engineer you actually reaching that goal. So if you can't afford to save for everything all at once, do what you can. If you know you need $1,000 a month saved to have $5,000 in 5 months, but you can only save $500, do what you can. And then maybe work on cutting back certain expenses or taking on some extra income to help you reach this goal. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that you want to focus on the most important or the time-sensitive sinking funds first. Okay, so once those are covered, then you can move on to the less important sinking funds. So it's going to take some trial and error. Please don't feel like you have to be a pro or an expert at this from the beginning, but eventually you will get into the groove with your savings. So a few things to kind of keep in mind. We have sinking funds with specific amounts or timelines, and then we have sinking funds with no specific amount or timeline. Typically, the sinking funds that don't really have a specific amount or a timeline, those are like nice to have sinking funds. So they get whatever's left after you have allocated funds to the sinking funds that have specific amounts or timelines. And let me just say, Saving $5 a month is better than nothing. So please, please, please don't feel bad if you can't afford to save much every month. The consistency is much more important than the amount. Okay, before we wrap, I want to just give you some tips and tricks for adjusting your budget to help you save more toward your sinking funds. So I have a few questions that you can ask yourself, and maybe this will help. First question is, can you reduce your fun or discretionary spending amount? I'm sure you've heard this before in the podcast. This is always my go-to, right? Where can you cut back? And typically discretionary areas are those places so that you can save a little more. Now, I'm not saying completely cut out. I don't believe in that. But where can you reduce a little bit so that you can put more toward your sinking funds? Can you spend a little less on gas or groceries every week? If you spend $100 a week on groceries, but you can get that down to $75 a week, that will add up to an extra $100 that can be saved toward your sinking funds. Can you get rid of a bill or subscription you don't really use? Can you work a few extra hours each month? These are just some questions to get you going, but remember, any extra savings is better than none at all. So the great thing about sinking funds is that you can set them up at any time. You'll need to make sure you are familiar with your budget, making sure you pay special attention to how your income should be allocated month over month. And when you know that you have income that can be allocated to your sinking funds, you can set them up successfully. So what's your next step? Well, if you don't have sinking funds set up, let's go ahead and get one set up this week. Make it a priority, add it to your to-do list, get it done. If you already have sinking funds set up, maybe reassess and make any adjustments that you need to so that you can reach those goals. Now, before I let you go, did you know that I create budget plans for clients and I offer one-on-one money coaching? I coach my clients through the habits, routines, and the mindset they need to set a budget and stick to it. You can learn more by checking out citygirlsavings.com and clicking the financial coaching page under Work with Raya. I will see you soon.